told that 160 acute care beds are going to have to be closed at least temporarily. Now, here to kind of spell it out for us this morning is Jim Flett, the top man in the Vancouver General Hospital. That's story number one. In town the other day was one of President Reagan's, in fact, the man who invented Reaganomics. His name is Dr. Arthur Laffer. And did it ever do any good? Here's what Laffer tells us.
Anything that's happening right now is the move towards a flat tax, to really simplify the tax code. So, I try to make it so that, make it so simple that even a congressman can understand. And try to make simplified tax codes to get rid of all the need for the lawyers, the accountants, and all those other people, so that people can figure out their own tax codes and we can lower rates dramatically to create the economic growth.
Flat tax is part of the long-range plan of Reaganomics, apparently. Now, we're going to have a short session this morning with that unusual politician, Jack Davis, the independent Social Credit MLA, on his particular political philosophy, and also the part he played in signing the endless lease to the Indian bands at Squamish, which is now being criticized by Ken Dye, the Auditor General of Canada. Yesterday, we started something in the cusp when we raised the problem of Phil Herridge, the sawmill operator who can't get an assured supply from the giant Webster timber TFL 23, which covers 1 million acres of British Columbia. We're going to have Herridge on later, but first of all, let's see what Sandy Fulton, who runs Webster Timber, said about giving our friend Herridge, who can supply jobs in the cusp, any kind of assured supply for his mill. Can we do that again, or will we just skip it? Just skip it. You'll see it on the principal program. And I was just saying to one of my guests here this morning how slick we are most days. However, we're getting near the end of the season. And I'll be back dealing with Jim Flett of VGH immediately after the break. The Vancouver General Hospital is the hospital in British Columbia. It's the principal centre for skilled medical treatment in the whole province of BC. And as I said at the beginning, 160 beds. Jim Flett, the Vancouver General Hospital, is here, so let's get some basic facts, Mr. Flett. One, are these permanent closures?
No. No, we intend to close the beds until such time as we recover the shortfall of 1.4 million. We're hoping that that will be a short period of time. We expect that it certainly will not be any longer than about 2.5 months.
That's providing other costs don't escalate in the meantime and put you in the soup once again.
That's correct.
Now, so you have 900 acute care beds and a couple of 300 extended care beds.
That's correct.
So you're going to close 160 of the 900 acute care beds.
That's correct. These are the only beds that really we have any option with. The other beds are full of patients who it would just not be possible to discharge.
Now, explain the finances to me. $177 million is your current overall budget for the entire hospital.
Yes, I'd be happy to explain our budget. The expenditure budget of the hospital is approximately $177 million. The revenue that we have available is $174 million. The Board of Trustees has already approved an expenditure budget in excess of our revenue of $3.1 million.
So that 3.1 you're going to, quote, lose this year anyway?
That's correct. The 1.4 we're talking about is in excess of that 3.1 million.
Is there no way that you can raise that 1.4 million?
The board considered, when we got to the point of recognizing that there was no way that we could stay within the expenditure limit of 177 million, we looked at two things. We looked at how we could get more money, and we looked at how we could save more money. And the practicality of getting 1.4 million between now and March 31st just didn't make sense. By far, the largest financial supporter of the hospital is the provincial government. 98% of our funding comes from there.
Have you asked Nielsen for this 1.4 million extra?
Yes, we have.
And what did he say?
It's been made very clear to us that the provincial government has no more funding for VGH for this current fiscal year.
So 160 beds will be closed. When will you start to close them?
Next week.
Next week. Now, when closing the beds, who do you lay off?
Well, we hope that we'll do it in a way that will minimize the effect on our permanent staff. By necessity, when you close beds, the people who it affect most are those that are closest to the patients. So that we would assume that the people that it will affect first are the casual employees, the relief employees that we bring into the hospital to fill the gaps in the day-to-day operation.
Now, what about the effects on it? I mean, when you close 160 beds, your normal occupancy rate on beds in that hospital runs how high?
Our normal occupancy would run in the low 90 plus on an average. And what that generally means is that we run almost full during the middle of the week, and we drop off towards the weekend.
Now, who's going to be hurt first? Elective surgery, I suppose.
The patients, it stands to reason that the patients who it will affect first will be the elective patients. No question that there will be fewer patients admitted to VGH, and that, I think, automatically means that some patients will have to wait longer to be admitted.
Yeah, but it's a long time for elective surgery. Now, what about the tense things for people? Cancer biopsies, heart surgery, and all these kind of pacemakers, high-tech stuff, emergency stuff.
One of the problems that a hospital like ours has, Jack, and you're right, that we want to be, we believe we are, we want to continue to be the principal referral center in BC. This doesn't mean that we're the only one. There are other hospitals like St. Paul's and Shaughnessy and UBC, but we have more responsibilities than just looking after patients. The things that we really worry about are our support of teaching programs. It's not easy when you're caught in this kind of squeeze to be able to ensure that we can maintain the kind of services that we need to give the experience to our student nurses, to our student physicians.
I'm not even thinking about them. I'm thinking about the patients waiting for a valve operation.
Well, there obviously will be some delays. There will be some longer waits for patients to come.
So your chances of dying if you're in a dicey position waiting for one of these high-tech operations will be increased by 20%, 1/5 of the beds. Oh no, with the number of beds you close in heart surgery.
That's correct. Because the way the problem is coming, and because of the departmentalization of the hospital, we're trying to spread our closures across all of our departments. So
including the major surgery departments?
There will be some effect on the major surgery departments too.
Will you cut back at all in the emergency department?
No, there will be no cutbacks.
No cutbacks in the emergency department. Now, I know it's being within 1.4 or $4 million of your budget is pretty close, but what are the things that shoot up the costs that you can't anticipate? You know what the wages are going to be, you know what the food's going to be. What are the things that shoot up the cost interminably, or incredibly?
Well, the thing that's affecting certainly our hospital, and I suspect most hospitals like ours right now, is the cost of high technology. The cost of the things that we're now able to do for people, like the implanting of lenses in the eyes, the replacement of knees, the replacement of valves in cardiac surgery, the implementation or the implantation of pacemakers. I can remember not too long ago when a pacemaker would cost $650 a piece. Today we're paying as high as $6,500 for these same units, and the average cost, the cost of most of the ones that we're implanting, is about $4,300. So that this is a thing
maybe we can't afford to do them anymore. Maybe you'll have to say, okay, no more $4,300 pacemakers.
Well, it's not going to be, I don't think, hospitals like Vancouver General that are going to make that decision. I think that's a decision that has to be made by society.
Or by the provincial government in the interim period?
On behalf of society, yes.
You're going to cut down the number of heart surgery cases, are you not?
Yes,
By what numbers?
We've been doing an average of 18 to 19. We will cut that down to about 14.
So that means in any given month there's going to be 20-odd people waiting for their operation who won't get it.
A little longer, that's correct.
Well, considerably longer if it's 20. It's almost close to 20%. Ah, dear, dear. I'm not going to put it to you, but the government's going to spend $100,000 on new TV ads to mend its image. And Mr. Flett, I trust, will take calls this morning, and he can field the calls about the cutbacks in the General Hospital. Going to close at least for a 3-month period. 3 months?
Not any longer then.
You hope?
We hope.
But you've no guarantee.
That's correct.
160 beds in the General Hospital. You may have to wait for, you will have to wait for elective surgery. You might go lower on the waiting lists, but that's what restraint brings to British Columbia, right or wrong. Calls in the General Hospital to Jim Flett after the break. Puts you in a tough spot this morning, Jim. You know, I used the wrong figure on the TV ads. It's $700,000 TV ad campaign by the government, which is precisely half of the VGH's deficit. That $700,000, if not spent on television ads, would prevent the closure of 80 beds at the General Hospital. $700,000, is that the right figure? It's the right figure. Jim, here's a call from you, right on the point. Go ahead, ma'am.
We came down from 100 Mile to go into the hospital to get a test for my husband on cancer. We waited about a week. Finally, a bed came up. Private ward, $45 in advance, plus the rest for the week we had to pay. If we didn't have the money, the girl said, there's lots of patients with cancer waiting. Take it or leave it. So nearly everybody that goes into that hospital, I imagine, has to pay that private bed for a day or two in order to get in.
Did you pay it?
We paid it, and I said I would squawk afterwards. And I squawked plenty, and he got out the first day. Besides that, the first day he was in there, they were working on 3 sides with jackhammers and drills all around him. It was atrocious.
Forget the jackhammers and drills. That's a problem. Is that a problem? Could a person be refused a bed for a test because they didn't have the $45?
Yes, that would be a problem.
Just a minute, I'm asking Jim Flett.
The policy at the hospital is that the $45 is for a private room. If one comes into the hospital and has a standard ward room, we all know that the daily rate is $8.50.
But if there's only a private ward room available, must I pay that before I can get it?
Unless it's an emergency and the physician believes that you have to be admitted to hospital as an emergency, then we would require that you would pay the standard.
In other words, you could come down from Williams Lake to get a test, not have $280 or even $90, and lose your chance for your test at that moment.
Well, it's unfortunate if a patient came all that way without realizing what would happen.
Ma'am, thank you for hearing your problem. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hi.
That's you.
Yeah, I would like to comment and ask Mr. Flett one specific question in general, and that is why is it always that when there's a cut in the budget, it's always either beds closing or staff being laid off?
You mean you're asking what other savings could be made? That's what you're saying, instead of closing beds and...
There's a lot of construction going on at that hospital right now. And what I'm wondering is why is all the construction going on when you can't operate what you've got?
Okay, good question.
It is a good question, and it's one of the questions that we've actually considered. Do we have an option in terms of forgetting about the future and concentrating on the present? And we have decided that it's important that the developments, that the renovations that are taking place, that the construction that is going on continue. The other part of the answer to that question, of course, is that a very large percentage of the expenditures of a hospital, it's roughly in our case about 80% of our expenditures are on people. The only way that we can curb, therefore, our expenditures in any real way is to pay fewer people. And immediately you start talking about paying fewer people, you eventually get to the question of how many beds can you operate with those people.
Have you trimmed your administrative staffs, though?
We have, during the last 4 or 5 years, trimmed as many of the administrative and support areas as we can. It's been an ongoing, constant program.
Mind you, you lost 100 beds a while ago, didn't you?
During the first, Vancouver General has changed tremendously in the last 5 to 8 years. It's gone from a very large hospital down to one that has a rated capacity now of 1,000 acute beds and 200 long-term care beds. And you're right, we've already closed, because of restraint earlier on, roughly 150 beds, so that we're down to the 900 bed level.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, a question that I have. How many of your assistant head nurses and head nurses who have the degrees are being laid off? I haven't heard this, I haven't heard him state this. I mean, these are the people with the high salaries.
That's true. We also believe, of course, that they're the people that a hospital like Vancouver General needs. We hope that they're the people that make us different from most other hospitals, that make us able to handle the referral and the acute patients we get. It's our hope that as we get into this particular program, that any layoffs of permanent full-time staff will be very minimal.
I see.
And you're going for casual relief and part-time workers?
That would be...
By the way, do you have a contract at the moment, or are you in negotiations soon?
No, we're getting into negotiations soon, but yes, we have a contract at the moment.
Go ahead, please.
Could you tell me what a heart operation, a bypass operation costs the hospital, and also how much does the doctor get for doing it?
I can't tell you that. I can't answer the second part of the question, but I can tell you that it varies. It varies tremendously. For us, it can go all the way from $10,000 to $25,000, depending on depending on the operation itself.
Up to $25,000 for a heart valve operation.
It could be. That would depend on whether or not it has to be redone. It would depend on the pacemaker that has to be inserted, if in fact a pacemaker has to be inserted at the time of the surgery.
And it can cost you up to $6,000 for a pacemaker.
Cost us up to $6,000 for a pacemaker.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, hi. Yes, I was wondering why I think the government uses a lot of the lottery money for sports and different things. Wouldn't it be more appropriate if they used it for saving people's lives and getting them in the hospital sooner and, going to this endeavor instead of sports?
What you're asking is, can the lottery funds help the General Hospital to avoid a $1.4 billion additional deficit?
We would take money from any place, lottery funds or anywhere else. I think that's a question really that has to be asked of government.
Has to go to Nielsen. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
I'd like to speak to the gentleman here. I want to know why these cutbacks again. When I was in April, I had my second valve implanted, and there was only a small staff then. And it was a 9-hour operation. I was only in 13 days. My husband had to dress me to get me out of that place. And it's not fair. I think it's about time somebody done something about it.
Well, you're just a plea for help, and I don't think Mr. Flett can help you much in that call, can you?
Not really.
More calls to Jim Flett after the break. Well, the bad news is 160 beds, at least temporarily closed until the end of the financial year in March at the General Hospital. And you may have to wait for that operation or treatment that you need. Go ahead from Vernon.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Your guest stated that an implant or pacer used to cost $650.
Right?
Now it costs in the neighborhood of $6,500.
More or less.
Yes. Well, so it isn't really funding that is the main problem, it's our expense. And the expense is caused by, I believe, our lifestyle. Everybody demanding more money from the manufacturer right up to the producer or the consumer. And I think it's people's lifestyles, which turned out to greed, that is our main problem, not just restraint. All these things are the cause of restraint.
Okay, does it?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. I agree with the gentleman that, that much of what we're seeing and what's causing our problem is lifestyles, the improvement that we want to see in the quality of life as we live it, and the technology is now available to make it possible to improve our quality of life, and people expect it, and
And everybody wants four valves planted if they need them, and a pacemaker,
and to see better, and to have better knees and better ankles. And,
but we can't afford it, can we?
Well, that's not for me to decide.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, there's one thing that the gentleman touched on before, is items going up as much as 600% of supplies to the hospital for some of the high-tech stuff. Are they questioning the suppliers or looking around for other suppliers, or are they just purchasing whatever the doctor wishes to purchase? And I disagree with the lifestyle thing, and many people are getting cut in wages, and yet you turn around and the supplier is increasing the cost to the...
Okay, he's asking you if you have any control over the cost of these items.
Yes, we do. Not as much as perhaps we'd like to have, but we do, in fact, tender these items, and we're doing more and more of the tendering as more and more competition in the marketplace to supply these things becomes available to us.
But it still hasn't stopped them going from 600 to an average of 4,700.
No, and we shouldn't be surprised at that, because the fact is that the technology is now available to do things and to make available to us things that we wouldn't have dreamed about many years ago.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Flett, I used to work at VGH 3 years ago. I was a regular part-timer. I was laid off. I was supposed to be recalled. Never happened. What I'd like to know is, how is the building service privatization going, and how much have you saved? And how much did that garbage compactor fiasco in Centennial Pavilion about 2 years ago cost the VGH?
Two questions. What have you saved in privatization of building maintenance? And what about the garbage compactor fiasco?
Well, I really can't answer either questions right off the top of my head. We have, I think the gentleman is referring to the fact that in our building service department, we do use a private management company to manage our building service. And yes, we have been looking to savings, and they were very meaningful savings in the first instance when we did change. I'm sorry, I just don't have an answer to your second question at the tip of my tongue.
The garbage compactor, what was it, old boy? You were working there at the time?
Yes, it was installed in the Centennial Pavilion garbage chute, and where previously building services looked after the garbage, it was given to us in transportation. The garbage compactor never worked properly. I wrote numerous reports about it, and finally, it was finally taken out when it overflowed numerous times. It overflowed one night, and I wasn't on duty, but another person was on duty. He called in the supervisor to help clean it out, and the next week it was gone.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm phoning from Fort St. John, Jack.
Right.
I would like to make a plea for the out-of-town patients that are coming down to VGH. It's very inconvenient when we have to come in and confirm the bed after we're down there, and I'm wondering if the gentleman could tell us if anything might be done in next year's budget after they reinstate the 160 beds with regards to out-of-town patients and a little more security for their bed. Because you're looking at a heck of a pile of money if you've got to go down and sit for 4 or 5 days and then be turned away because your bed has been given up because of an emergency situation or something. I'll hang up now and listen to his replies.
Thank you.
We feel very sympathetic towards the patients who come to us from out of town, and we regret very much when inconvenience has been caused. One of the things that we have been planning, and we actually have been doing, is making available rooms in our residence, in our nurses' residence, for those patients who, from out of town who either are delayed, as you might have been, or come to us for a procedure that does not really require to be admitted to hospital.
So you're using the old nurses' residence as a temporary accommodation?
That's correct.
Do you charge them
yes,
for
we
it?
do. We charge $20 a night for that accommodation. We also make that accommodation available to relatives of patients who come from out of town. And we hope that that's something that will help us and perhaps help patients solve the common problem that we...
But it won't be affected by the 160-bed closure?
We won't be closing any of those beds, no.
No. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
I was curious about the effect on the potential for delaying patients being admitted to general wards from the emergency department as a result of the closures. And is this going to cause the patients to back up perhaps into the hallways waiting for available space?
The old story.
Yes, and the gentleman who called in sounds as though that perhaps he's had some experience with that.
Great deal.
That was one of the very real problems that Vancouver General had a number of years ago. We are aware that that could be a problem that we'd face in the next couple of months. We are concerned that that not happen, and we are therefore going to try to ensure that we will not delay patients in the corridors or in the emergency any longer than we possibly than we have to.
But that's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
Remember the days when we used to send camera crews and reporters down to watch the people stacked up in the old emergency?
I remember them well. When I arrived at Vancouver General, I just couldn't believe the number of patients that we had up those corridors in the
Is it going to come back to that again?
No, I don't think so. At least I would hope not.
Would you divert patients away from the hospital?
Well, we do divert. The hospitals in Vancouver do, when appropriate, divert patients from one to the other. These tend to be the very acute patients that require respirators or ventilators. That has been working reasonably well in Vancouver.
Thank you. Well, nothing but bad news this morning, Mr. Flett, right?
Yes.
Nothing but bad news from you this morning.
That's correct.
You have no way that you can avoid this closure.
We have looked at every alternative that we have, and no, we believe that this is the only reasonable thing we can do.
And Nielsen's people say not another nickel.
That's correct.
So if you want to do anything about it, it's up to you to make your protest to Nielsen. If you think it's unreasonable that a miserable $1.4 million is going to close 160 beds when the government is spending, we're told, $700,000 on TV ads for a new image. Best of luck, Mr. Flett.
Thank you for having me on your show.
To you and your patients, eh?
Thank you.
What's next? Oh, a short piece with Jack Davis, and then a free-for-all on the cusp, and some developments on the cusp after the break. I got to do the old napkin trick. If it hadn't been for a napkin like this in a cocktail bar, you might never have heard of the U.S. economics expert that I'm going to interview today. His name is Arthur Laffer. He is a member of the Economic Policy Advisory Board to that man to the south of us by the name of Ronald Reagan. He is responsible for the Laffer curve, which has got nothing to do with my curves or your curves, but describes his supply-side economics theory. Now, can I call you Arthur?
Sure.
Seemed quite a nice guy for an American economist.
Thank you.
Arthur, they tell me your supply-side economic theory is down the drain now, and that the real advisors on Reaganomics are those people who believe in the old prime-the-pump Keynesian theories. Am I right or wrong?
Wrong.
Have you still got influence on the presidential economic policies?
Well, I don't know if I ever did. The president has believed what I say long before I was born. In fact, the president is the real prime supply-sider. he knows exactly what's going on with those incentives.
In other words, he's a good, dyed-in-the-wool, natural-born, free enterpriser who doesn't want to pay any tax and doesn't have much in the way of social responsibility in his makeup.
Oh, he wants to pay tax, but just not so much tax to ruin output, employment, and production. What he wants to do is pay enough tax, and through a flat tax proposal, to collect the requisite revenues to provide for the social functions to those who truly need it. But, you know, like Jack Kennedy before him, I mean, we said the best form of welfare is still a good, high-paying job. And you never make people better off by destroying the underlying productive nature of the economy. And that's exactly what Ronald Reagan's trying to do. Enterprise zones, tax rate reductions, economic growth.
It sounds exactly like some of our real right-wing reactionary politicians like Mulroney or Bennett in Canada. You've heard about Bennett, have you?
Well, I've heard about Mulroney and Bennett, yes.
Yeah. But
I thought they raised taxes, not lowered them.
I know, but at the same time they want economic zones and they want to give all the cuts they can to their friends in big business. That's why I don't trust them.
See, I wouldn't trust that either totally. I mean, number one, Ronald Reagan cut taxes on individuals, not so much on business. In fact, the personal income tax rate reductions were literally for everyone. In fact, the lower your income, the more the cut, and especially with the indexing.
But you see, I must point out to you, if you don't already know, the big difference from our attitude. This is a socialized country, right?
You're the Canadian now.
Well, we've got total socialized medicine across the country, no doubt about it, right? We've got very sound, solid, in terms of payments, safety nets, which you don't have in the States, correct?
We have a lot of safety nets. I don't know about the comparison, but we have a lot.
Yeah, but where does the U.S. economy go from here now, and what particular economics is Reagan using?
Well, the exciting thing that's happening right now is the move towards a flat tax, to really simplify the tax code. So, I mean, I try to make it so that, make it so simple that even a congressman can understand. And try to make simplified tax codes to get rid of all the need for the lawyers, the accountants, and all those other people, so that people can figure out their own tax codes and we can lower rates dramatically to create the economic growth.
Are you telling me seriously that the U.S. may be headed towards a flat tax of, say, 20%?
Well, I don't know if it'll go that low, but 25, 30%.
25%?
Sure.
For everybody above the certain basic levels of exemption?
In fact, that's the Bradley Gephardt. It literally is that. The Kemp-Kasten is virtually a flat tax of 25% across the board, yes. Now, they have exemptions in there, but only up to, I think, Kemp-Kasten is up to $14,350 before you start paying taxes. And Bradley Gephardt starts at $11,200 or so. I mean, so they major changes in the tax codes, and they're really exciting.
Well, forgive me if I'm a little bit cynical. We had one oddball candidate for the leader of the Tory party called Peter Pocklington. He owns Wayne Gretzky, that's his claim to fame. And he was laughed out of the nation with his flat tax idea. How come we haven't heard so much about it up here if you're seriously going on a flat tax?
Oh, goodness. I mean, it's been the big talk in the United States. I mean, maybe they don't read the newspapers or so, but the Bradley Gephardt's been around for 2 years, Kemp-Kasten the last year. You got the new Treasury proposal, which is, again, a major proposal put out by Donald Reagan of the Treasury. And in fact, all that's going to go into legislation and go to debate next year. It's very exciting.
Would this be a decision based on the economics of the flat tax or a political decision based on cutting civil servants?
Oh, no, it has nothing to do with cutting civil servants. It's literally revenue neutral.
Sell me the flat tax.
I'll sell you the flat tax. Basically what it does is it gets rid of a lot of deductions, exemptions, exclusions, and in their stead lowers rates. So that literally it increases your incentives in the margin, not to invest in some tax advantage investment, to invest in really underlying productive investments, so you can create output, employment, and production without doing all this tax shelters and creating all that sort of stuff. And frankly, it's just trying to simplify the tax codes and make it so that people pay effectively the same marginal rate across the board.
Corporations, of course, would still have all their present incentives and tax loopholes and corporate rip-offs.
In fact, every one of those is gone. In fact, corporations are probably, if you look at it, the most hard hit in all three proposals. It gets rid of the investment tax credit. It gets rid of the R&D tax credit. Now, these are all the proposals. It gets rid of the foreign sales exemption. It gets rid of the percentage depletion allowances. Now, it does lower the highest rate in corporations from 46% to 30%, but it raises the lowest rate up to 30%. So it has a major effect on corporations, and in the Treasury proposal would increase taxes on corporations.
And people would tend to be more honest about their tax returns.
I hope so. I mean, that surely makes sense that they would be if they didn't have any advantage by being dishonest.
When do you think that, will Reagan live long enough to bring it in? He's an old man.
Oh, he's lively and young and spry. In fact, he's a lot younger than a lot of my friends my age. He's incredible. I mean, his recovery from the gunshot and all that. Have you seen, I mean, He's pretty spry.
I understand he can't hear people at press conferences, and his wife answers for him on occasions.
What? I didn't catch that.
But however, he's quite spry, you do assure me.
He is quite something, yeah.
And they tell me that the defense policies are lined up for him in simple little cartoons so he can understand.
You're beyond mine. I don't know about his...
You don't know about these things?
No, not his defense policy.
When will we see the flat tax in the United States? Because we're the tail of the dog. We might follow if you do it.
Well, I think what you'll see is the legislation being passed and put through in 1985, and then the effective date being 1986, which is really too bad, because seriously, you know, what you have to do is a major reduction in tax rates starting in 86. Now, if you know that tax rates are going to be lower in 1986 than they are in 1985, what you'll do is you'll postpone production, income, employment. So it will mean a very sharp slowdown in the U.S. economy during 1985, all in anticipation of the lower tax rates in 1986.
Are you now predicting then, apart from all the complications of 25% flat tax or whatever, that there is going to be a major slowdown in the economy in 86?
Yes, 85.
In 85?
Yes, in 85.
In preparation for what they think will be the breaks in 86?
No, an expansion, very enormous expansion in 86. In other words, 86 is going to look so good with the new flatter tax that people are going to postpone production and employment in 85 to take advantage of 86.
Do you recommend that Canada should be following this lead?
Oh, I think a flatter tax makes sense for anyone. And I think really in Canada's case, it's exceptionally important to have good tax structure.
More with Arthur Laffer, L-A-F-F-E-R, no kidding, the Laffer curve, the man with a napkin, after the break.
You're counting down to 5. Joanne's going to count down to 5, and I'm going to say roll it.
We have to get rid of your intercom.
Okay, everything's down. Okay, just. Okay, and Joanne, you're supposed to count down from 5. Look at your stopwatch or something.
Okay, sure. Okay, 5, 2, ENG, 1, 4. 3, 2.
Ready, 1, and roll it.
I cannot hear you.
I cannot.
I forgot to explain Arthur Laffer's favorite napkin. What have you drawn on the napkin? What you drew?
I've drawn on the napkin. What you have here in the vertical axis are tax rates, and the horizontal axis are tax revenues. And what you can see is that there are 2 effects tax rates have on total revenues. One which we call the arithmetic effect, which is whenever you raise rates, you collect more revenue per dollar of tax base. And likewise, if you lower them, you collect less revenue per dollar of tax base. But that's only the arithmetic effect. There's also an economic effect, which if you raise tax rates, you reduce the incentives for doing that activity, and you'll shrink the tax base. Likewise, if you lower rates, you increase the incentives, and you'll expand the tax base. And these 2 effects always work in the opposite direction. By way of illustration, if you tax someone at 104% of everything they earn, in fact, if every time you went to the office, instead of getting a check, you got a bill, how long would you work? No.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, that would be, how about 108%? I mean, at some stage, you get no revenues. Likewise, at 0 tax rates, you get none. Now, at this 100% rate, as you lower tax rates, you cause more production, output, and employment, and revenues rise. Likewise, if you raise tax rate from 0%, you get an increase in revenues. And this is the curve. It's purely a pedagogic device.
Pedagogic advice, which was adopted by the Reagan administration, correct? Up till 1981-82.
Oh, since then, too.
Since then, too?
Sure.
Well, people like my friend Lester Thurow say that supply-side economics, yours, died of exposure. And the only way to bring the world economy out of the Great Depression is priming the pump, Keynesian. Is that not true?
Oh, that's what he says. I'm sure it's true. It's wrong, but it's surely true that, by the way, we who know him real well, we refer to him as Les Thorough.
Les Thorough instead of Lester Thurow. You sound a little bit too glib for me. I don't like this particular idea, though, of cutting taxes, which is your basic thrust. Cutting taxes all the time, cutting budgets, letting the poor suffer, and letting the businessman rip it off.
Gee, I don't agree with that either. the way you've described
That's
it.
what you told me just now.
No, not at all. In fact, I never said anything about letting the poor suffer. In fact, just the reverse. You know, I think the only way you want to reduce government spending is not by cutting spending for those who need it. The way you cut spending is by reducing the need first. The reason I've always proposed cutting tax rates first, like Jack Kennedy did, was number one, to provide the private incentives to increase output, employment, production, get people off the welfare rolls, and then you can reduce that spending. But if a guy has not got a job and can't find one, you don't cut spending to that person.
Perhaps the answer, though, to get the guys jobs in this country and your country, you have a much bigger pool of unorganized cheap labor than we have, don't you? I mean, you could create all kinds of jobs tomorrow at $3 an hour.
Well, there are a lot of people who are unemployed at that wage rate, yes.
Yeah, and would like to work for that wage rate.
A little bit higher than that, but yes, they would. They'd love to work.
Yeah.
A lot of people would like to work in the United States.
What do you do about these highly paid union workers who will not break their contracts and they're getting 20, 22 bucks an hour, or 16 bucks an hour, and just won't go to work?
Well, in the United States, and I don't know anything about Canada, but in the United States, the union labor is not a problem. They've lowered their wages dramatically in many industries, number one. Number two is they've provided good output increases in employment in many areas. And you know, they've not gone for the huge wage demands they could have.
The U.S. labor is much more, should I say, less militant, much more supine than Canadian.
Well, I don't think it's supine. I mean, they understand that without jobs, they don't do well. And they like jobs like capital. I mean, no one's better off when you stop working. No one's better off when you strike. And U.S. labor, along with U.S. capital, realizes that the heart of all prosperity is production.
Make it so popular. Look into that camera and advocate that the Building Trades Council in British Columbia and all the major British Columbia unions should cut wages and let the employer make a profit.
And I don't know the situation.
Come on, stick your neck out.
I'm not going to do that.
Yes, that's what you say happens in the States.
But it happens only when it's needed in the States.
Oh, it's needed here now and nobody will move an inch on wage levels.
Well, if it's needed, then I'll advocate it, but I trust your judgment totally on that.
I'm telling you, the boss says it's needed, you see.
Well,
22 bucks plus $4 fringe for carpenters.
You agree fully then with that? You want to recut their wages back dramatically? And
I'm merely a provocateur trying to get you into trouble
You're
with the
trying to
locals.
get me into trouble in Canada, but I don't understand the Canadian unions. But I do understand U.S. unions. And they're not an enemy of the people. I mean, they're very pro. I mean, unions are phenomenal, and I see nothing wrong with them in the United States or with companies. They work together to provide us high-quality products at low prices.
Okay, you predicted that things are going to be bad in 85.
Yes.
Ready for 86. That
86
applies.
is going to be phenomenal.
Will that apply to us?
Well, you know, I should think that we live in a very similar area. And in fact, I would think Canada would do very well once the U.S. does very well.
This guy Mulroney, who's really a bit of a Gandhi dancer out of Quebec, who's got no political experience at all, he seems to think that he could get away with sectoral free trade with the United States. Does that make any sense to you?
I don't know. I'd have to see it specifically. But sectoral free trade is by automobile free
Yes.
trade and then
Yes.
individual. I mean, really seriously, I think the more free trade we have between Canada and the United States, the better we all are off. I mean, I'm very much opposed to U.S. policies to try to restrict Canadian imports. I mean, very pro free trade with Canada, and be it in automobiles, be it in lumber, be it in any products. I mean, I think that we have a lot to gain from each other.
How is your economy now? We're told you only have, what, 7 to 8% unemployment?
A little bit, low 7.
Low 7?
Yeah.
Are these real figures?
Oh, yes, those are real figures. I mean, it's good as
Because you
they've
see,
been.
we have 12 to 20% unemployment. It's about 15 in British Columbia. So
too bad.
We're not getting any benefits from your economy. Your recovery is still largely a domestic recovery, isn't it?
See, that's why you need the tax cuts, so you can have it too. It's real important. These things really do work. When you provide people incentives to work and produce, they work and they produce, and that's what's really brought the U.S. prosperity.
How much has Reagan really cut in taxes since he came in?
You know, not really dramatically very much. He stopped the increases, though, sharply. I mean, we had scheduled tax increases of dramatic proportions. What Ronald Reagan has done with the tax bill of 1981 is stop that increase, in fact, cut some rates pretty substantially, but basically it's just put a holding action on.
And can you still afford $1.6 trillion for defense?
Well, I don't know if we can afford. I mean, defense is a real issue that's not budgetary issue. I mean, if you spend too little for defense, you're in deep trouble. If you spend too much in defense, you're wasting every penny you spend excessively. I mean, Jack Kennedy put it beautifully in 1961 when he said that, you know, putting locks in your door is not wasted money. And a reporter responded to him. He said, but sir, putting the 35th lock in your door is wasted money. Defense is something that if you need it, you spend it. If you don't, you don't. It's really wasted. And I'm not an expert on whether we need it or not.
So Laffer of the Laffer curve predicts the flat tax will be in effective 86 in the States.
In the States?
Recommends it for any free nation.
In fact, even for unfree ones if they can get it.
But just for the moment,
yes.
In British Columbia, where we've got hell of a heavy unemployment and a totally lackluster provincial governments hiding in a hole somewhere, Don't you think they should be priming the pump to get people back to work right now?
Yeah. Tax policy is exceptionally important in your provinces. For example, let me give you an example, and I'll use a U.S. example if I can. A steel company in southern Ohio and another steel company in northern Kentucky, right? Because they're both very close to each other and they both sell in the U.S. market, they sell steel at the same basic price. Because they're both in the same labor market, they pay the same after-tax wages to their workers. Now, if Ohio raises taxes and Kentucky doesn't, what's that Ohio company going to do? It can't pass the tax forward in higher prices. It can't pass it backwards in lower wages. They've got to swallow that tax, get less profits. Now, when you're going to go expanding, which of the steel mills do you expand? The one in Kentucky, not the one in Ohio. Tax policy is critical to good performance of a province as well as a state.
One final question. Yes. Our boy Mulroney was down to the Economic Club in New York and said, he touched his forelock and said, anything you want you can have. Do you think that removal of our Foreign Investment Review Agency and all the troubles will bring Americans up to invest in Canada at a time when our dollar is only 75.86 cents to yours?
Yes, I think that's been a major discouragement of the U.S. investment in Canada and developing the production base of Canada, and vice versa. I mean, you know, there's no room for chauvinism. There's no room for isolationism in this world today. I mean, we happen to share the same continent, and frankly, I feel closer to Canada than I do many eastern states. So I just want to tell you that, frankly, I feel a very great affinity, and a lot of Americans do too, and vice versa. It's shared. And I think whatever is good for the whole North American economy, I think is really good for all of us.
Mind you, we're the mouse in bed with the elephant. We can be trampled on at any time by you
people.
See,
I think of each state as being sort of a mouse in bed with a giant U.S. elephant. See, I have probably as many problems with Washington, D.C. as Canadians do. The thing is, our policies towards sharing the benefits, I think, are really important.
Final question. Reagan can't go again. Even if he lives till the end of this term, he can't go again, correct?
I think that's correct, yes.
Who's your nominee?
The nominee.
Pick one.
The Republican Party?
No, who's the guy you'd like to see follow Reagan as president?
Well, there are a number of good ones, but George Bush, Jack Kemp would be excellent as Republicans.
Wasn't George Bush the guy who said that you practiced voodoo economics?
He sure did. But he's learned a lot as vice president. Now, he's become very good.
George Bush, who else?
Jack Kemp is excellent. I mean, just really very good. Bill Bradley, the Democrat who's now got the flat tax, an exceptionally fine person. I mean, we've got a lot of good people coming. I think Jack Kemp would probably make the best president right now, but, you know, we want to wait and see what happens in the next 3 years. Okay, before you go, I want you to do me a flat tax on your napkin so we can make it the Laffer flat tax napkin. Well, you know, after my diet, I may get a flatter tax. You want to lose weight? I sure do. You don't look fat on television because they can only see you from here out. Thanks. Pritikin diet. The Pritikin diet? I thought you were going to say, do you want to lose 30 pounds of ugly fat? Cut off your head. I thought I was going to meet some stuffed shirt U.S. economist, you know the kind. A remarkable human being, quite bright too, for his age, size, and nationality. I'll be back after the break. You want to know how to make democracy work? Buy a book, Popular Politics, by a kind of a surprising author, Jack Davis. Jack Davis is the kind of independent social creditor in the House of Victoria. Would you describe yourself as such? Independent, but basically, if it's an issue where the government might fall, I vote with the government. With the government? But you're an independent-minded social creditor in Victoria. Why the devil would you write a book on how to make democracy work? Why not? We're having trouble making it work. One, Jack, and two, I've written a lot of articles and letters to the editor and so on. I decided to distill out of my files something which was coherent and consistent, and that's the product. Now, I notice you make, I'm just gone to the provocative things. I notice in chapter XV2217, you talk about dismantling the welfare state. Is that part of your political philosophy, to dismantle the welfare state? Certainly dismantle big government. A floor under people who genuinely need support, but otherwise let people fend for themselves. Oh, you can't mean that, surely. Nowadays, this country would grind to a halt if it were not for UIC, WCB, unemployment, welfare, would it not? Well, I wouldn't do away. I wouldn't do away with unemployment insurance, but I wouldn't have the state help fund it. I would have it paid by the employer and employee, and have it tightened up in some measure. But I wouldn't do away with unemployment insurance. That's one of the floors which has to be under people, especially in a society where there's a great deal of change. People have to learn new skills and move to other jobs.
What about our much vaunted medical care plan? Now that's a state finance plan which is not really user pay.
Yeah, well, I put an element of user pay into it, but again, like education, health is a broad need of the whole community and has to be funded in large part by the state. But I would give the individual more say in how that big system operates.
Now, you made a passing reference there to big business and why it should be broken up. Surely in today's international competition, the only way that we can survive as a trading partner in the world is if we have properly coordinated multinationals.
Well, I recognize the need for corporations, even multinational, very large corporations, but there has to be a way in which the people through government can reasonably control them and make them more responsible not only to their shareholders but to the people generally. The book is about how the individual can, to a greater extent, wield power in our society. And I would put controls, limitations on big corporations, big unions, and obviously big government.
But right now we have a classic example of how the individual has no power at all, surely.
That's right.
In this steamroller of Mulroney's government of neophytes,
yeah,
he becomes, under the British parliamentary system, virtually a dictator, does he not?
That's right, but he is subject to recall as a result of elections, so there's a degree of responsibility there. But government has grown too large, and his power as a result of government being large is much greater than it should reasonably be.
And he can't be held to campaign promises, he can't be held to anything, can he?
Well, it's partly because he doesn't totally understand, the people with him don't totally understand this massive, complex mechanism which is developed, and certainly the voting public does not. I try to address that problem and come up with some answers.
Is there one philosophy, you're sitting with Social Credit, you used to be a Liberal cabinet minister, is there one philosophy which encompasses these views, or is this a maverick, although considered view of the political structure?
Well, I'd like to call it a considered view. It's an individualistic approach. It's even a populist approach. But I couldn't label it liberal. Certainly not modern-day liberal. I couldn't really label it conservative, and I certainly couldn't label it social credit, because social credit doesn't have an explicit philosophy.
We won't explore that for the moment. But you talked about big government. Why, at this very moment, you might say, Kenneth Dye, the Auditor General, is taking a pot shot at something you did when you were Environment Minister and Liberal MP for Capilano.
Yes.
You signed a 71-year lease on land at the mouth of the Capilano River,
yes,
in your riding, which was to be the site of a $21 million Pacific Environment Centre.
Yes.
It's been sitting there unused, and we are paying the Squamish Indian Band $1.3 million a year lease,
yes,
for a vacant piece of land. So perhaps you are a good example of the weaknesses of big government yourself.
Yeah, in a way, yes, but that situation, if I encapsulate it, if the West had had clout or continued to have clout in cabinet, we would have had a national environment centre on the west coast of Canada, one looking after the Western Arctic as well as West Coast Canada, wildlife, fisheries, forestry, water pollution control, and so on. They have one, the Canada Centre, on the Great Lakes now in Hamilton. They have one in Halifax. They want to have one in St. John's, Newfoundland. They have one in Quebec City. We don't have any yet, and we should have had one. Now, that land has sat idle for the last dozen years. They should have done something with it.
Do you feel that Dye is right to draw attention to it? You might get some reflected criticism from this. Was it your fault it's been lying there for the last dozen years, paying the Indians $1.3 million a year for a vacant piece of land?
I think it could in some measure be my fault if I'd remained a minister of the federal cabinet. But a dozen years have elapsed, and I've been in the provincial legislature, 8 of them, so I don't think it's my fault. It's too bad we didn't have the same kind of treatment in the West as the East has been able to obtain because they elected the so-called right people.
You know, you have lots of qualifications for writing books. You were a Rhodes Scholar, as I recall.
Yeah, the basics of that book were developed when I was at Oxford, and I studied politics, philosophy, and economics there. Yeah?
Everyone has the right to work, the right to privacy, the right to know, but the book says you've no right to job security.
initiative, opportunity, right to an education, right to learn a new skill and so on, but not the absolute assurance of a job.
Is this, said Webster, taking a cheap shot, what I call a vanity press book?
I gather, Jack, from you it is a vanity press book.
No, but you paid for the publication of printing of it.
Yes, I paid some $13,000 to get it typed and printed.
Oh, Angus Ree was nagging you, wasn't he? Yeah. About getting some typed by your caucus
he was a way off base there, and he's told me privately he doesn't see any wrong in what I did.
No, you would use your secretary to write speeches.
If I wrote a speech on any topic or a letter to the editor, it's the same thing.
And now I see you're a cartoonist. How much is Jack Davis's vanity press book on popular politics, how to make democracy work?
$10 from my constituency office, $9.95 in Duffy's and so on.
$10.
$10.
Well,
good value, Jack.
Good value.
It's a textbook. It's not a partisan thing, really, and it's my attempt to sort out my own thinking.
My thanks to Jack Davis. I hope you sell 10 million copies by Christmas.
I've only got 5,000, Jack.
Sell 4,999. I'll be back after the break. It seems that when I sent Steve Wyatt up to the cusp to look at the problems of Phil Herridge, small sawmill operator, that he uncovered the tip of a very big, questionable iceberg. I want to take a minute to explain something before I do anything else. Back in the 50s, I think it was, Celgar, which became Webster, part of Brick, got a tree farm license of 1 million acres. 1 million acres of British Columbia. One of the big tree farm licenses. And I'd always thought that when you got a tree farm license, you had to take the timber off that tree farm license and the allowable cut and use it. I learned, for instance, yesterday that you can sell that timber, you know, and you become a broker in timber making deals. Well, the other thing which came up yesterday was that when that license was given, there was a hell of a lot of white pine in it, a very valuable commodity. And I'm told that since, maybe even in the last 10 or 15 years, 600 million board feet of white pine have died from disease and not been used. And the revenue lost to the government and everybody in the non-usage of that 600 million board feet of white pine is absolutely horrendous. You'd wonder what's going on in the care and supervision of these giant, massive tree farm licenses, which used to be called forest management licenses till they got a bad name because of a graft deal in the cabinet. And the other thing that came up was that while Webster operates the pulp mill and the sawmill at Castlegar, the little guys who've been there all their lives cannot get an assured supply of timber. No way can they get any of that timber. Now, sure, they can get timber somewhere else. They can bid for little cutting permits. They can buy it on the market. But you'd think, being part of that community, they would have a right to have some assured timber from this massive 1 million acres of forest. Well, that's why we interviewed Phil Herridge. Phil Herridge, his mill is shut down. He could employ between 10 and 20 people. The Chernoffs could expand if they could get a firm supply of white pine. But let's first of all turn to Phil Herridge. And remember, when we saw Herridge last week, he had no deal for a supply of timber with Webster. Let's see what Sandy Fulton told us on yesterday's program about Herridge's supply of timber. So all being well, Herridge should be back in business soon.
I would hope so, but that's basically an issue between him and the local operators in the area. But we've expressed our inclination to accommodate him any way we possibly can over the short term.
Over the short term. In other words, there's no certainty of long-range supply. None
Absolutely.
whatsoever.
He didn't when he started, and he doesn't now.
No way can he have it.
That's right.
And remember that. That's what Sandy Fulton of Webster said, because the position had softened after Steve went up there and we began to make a fuss. Let's see now what Phil Herridge tells us. Have you made a deal with Sandy Fulton or with Webster so that you can get your 10 men back to work in a town where 54% of the population are out of work, Phil? Phil?
Yes.
Have you made a deal?
He's made a very short-term deal. I have at this point received 8 loads of logs out of the Fish River. And this deal is totally subject to the settlement of the tugboat strike.
In other words, if you've got 8 loads, how long will that keep you going for?
Oh, that should last me 3-4 days, something like that, Jack.
So, and has he promised you more?
At this point in time, if the tugboats don't go back to work, he will put a contractor to work to supply me, again on the short term. Now, had the tugboaters talk, had they settled on Sunday night, I would have received nothing. So you've got to realize that this is extremely short term.
So all you're getting is one contract logger. When does the contract logger go back to work for Webster to get the seeded for you?
I would assume this coming week, Jack.
Have you agreed on a price?
Yes, and that, the wood that I bought out of the Fish River, I trucked it 60 miles to my mill. I paid $100 a unit for the wood on deck.
Right.
This gives Webster a profit of approximately $50 per unit. I personally question this in that it's Crown Timber. I really feel that if there is a $50 a unit profit above and beyond all costs, when they're paying something like $1.79 a unit overall for the timber, I feel that that $50 should go back to the Ministry of Forests and be put back into our forests.
Is it economic for you to pay $100 a unit?
It makes it very tight, Jack. It's running my cost to probably 125 to 135 delivered in the yard.
So what you've got are a few crumbs from the rich man's table.
Yes, that's essentially it, Jack, right now. It's better than nothing, but it's not very much. 8
loads of logs which were on dry land at the Fish River, and as long as the strike settles, the contractor working for the big boys, Webster, will give you some cedar, and will it still be $100 a unit if it's freshly felled?
Yes, it will be, Jack. If they move closer into the area where this contractor is going to start logging, it will be $90 a unit.
I see, but you feel that's a rip-off?
Well, I feel the money is misdirected. I could live with the $100, but I feel the money is misdirected. I think that should go back into our forest.
Fair enough. So when will you hire your men for start Monday or what?
Yes, we're going to try and start up Monday, Jack.
But you might only be going a week depending on when the tug strike on the Outer Lakes is settled. Right?
Yes.
Well, it's a very, very, very small step forward from the cusp in terms of jobs, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Jack.
Well, we'll keep in touch with you. I plan to invite the Minister of Forests and some other people here early in the new year to have a look at the overall management of TFL 23, because it's been undercut, I think, since just about day one, certainly since 1974. And I fail to understand how, with an undercut, you can't get some of that undercut. But then again, forest management licenses are messy, complicated deals. Phil, you will keep in touch, will you?
Absolutely, Jack.
And your 10 guys can go back to work. Is it 5 or 10 you'll start on Monday?
I'll probably start 5 back Monday, Jack.
5, and if you had an assured supply, you could probably hire 20.
Yes, I could. Yes, I would definitely expand, but I would have to have an assured supply, because originally Bill Chernoff, for instance, was given a supply of pine. The minute that Bill started cutting it, I was there. I was working for the company, and there was 3 contractors immediately formed to more or less cream the white pine ahead of Bill Chernoff. And this is what we did right up to date. Every time Chernoff has got a good pine area, he's had competition over it.
In other words, they go in on the forest management license, cutting rights, and cream the area and leave him the leftovers.
That's right. And interestingly enough, Bill Chernoff is making money taking up the leftovers in the poorer stands. And occasionally, the Webster Mill has lost money cutting that pine.
Okay, we'll leave the Chernoff detail for another day, but we're going to make a big push on this in the new year. And we're going to get Waterland on here, and if he doesn't come on here, we'll nag him every bleeding day until he appears. Thank you. I'll take my break now and then come back to what calls I can fit in between now and the end of the program. Lonnie Stewart of the IWA is phoning from the cusp. Now, what do you make of the mess, Lonnie?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that BC Timber is just trying to get out of the TFL altogether.
Well, they gave up.
Only 200 staff employees have been laid off in the cusp in Castlegar in the past year or two. And my question is, I'm wondering if Webster is planning on a permanent closure of the sawmill at Castlegar. And if not, are there any plans to upgrade the sawmill? BC Timber had plans to upgrade and expand the pulp mill before Brick took over. Due to company purchasing chips from other mills, this expansion has to take place before the wood not suitable for saw logs and TFL can be utilized. As this was the idea behind the TFL, it is imperative this expansion be started right away. As the majority of the wood on the TFL is pulpwood, it would put the loggers of the cusp back to work. And I'm wondering, is there any expansion of the pulp mill planned?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have to leave that till the beginning of the new year, but I want to have a good, solid look at all the interests involved in TFL 23. Now, as an IWA man, how do you feel about assured supply for these non-union outfits like Herridge and or Chernoff and or is Columbia Shake non-union too?
Yes, it is.
How do you feel about it?
Well, we had a working crew of 150 people here a couple of years ago, IWA members.
Right.
They've cut that back down to approximately 40 now. We have to work, whether it be in an IWA operation or not.
Right.
And if the IWA isn't going to be in here, then we have to have loggers in here. And whether it be contract or whether it be IWA, we have to work.
Do you agree that these little guys, I mean, obviously you'd much prefer Castlegar going full out both in the sawmill and the pulp, but these guys should have an assured supply of lumber.
Definitely. If Webster is not going to log this TFL themselves, then they should be given a piece of it.
Well, we know the massive undercuts they've had on that TFL in the past 10 years. Lonnie, it's all the time I can give you this morning, but I'll say to you what I said to Herridge. When we're back at the beginning of January, we're going to get after Waterland and develop this thing as strongly as we can, because I have a sneaking suspicion that more than the one forest management license is being badly handled in the interest of the people of British Columbia. When somebody tells me that 600 million board feet of white pine has been allowed to disease and die over a period of years, breaks your bleeding heart, doesn't it?
That's right.
Thank you, Lonnie. A call from the cusp. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
Red McQuarrie here. I'd like to touch on an important issue that has been overlooked so far, and that's the burning of salvageable wood in the area.
Who burns it?
The company, Webster burns it.
What kind of wood?
Cedar.
How do you know?
Well, I was directly involved with some burning. I was working at Claim, cutting shake blocks for the local mill, shake mill. And on a Sunday they went in. I wasn't working the Sunday. They went in and they just set fire to the whole works.
They would tell me that was bad cedar.
No, it was on the ground. And our understanding with the company is that anything that's salvageable is to be left alone. It's not to be burnt.
When was that?
A month ago.
Well, keep the date, and when we go back into this again, we'll ask Webster to explain that. You can give me the time and the place and the date, and you were an eyewitness.
All right.
Okay, now don't leave your number, by the way. Oh, Steve's got your number. Keep in touch. Now, here's another logging contractor from the cusp. It's amazing how we're concentrating on the cusp, but I think this is a small picture of what may well be happening around nearly every forest management license in British Columbia, and it's time somebody looked at them. Go ahead from the cusp.
Yeah, I'm a logging contractor in the cusp. I've worked for for Webster for the last 15 years. And
go on. Maybe your television sound is up.
Logged for the company for the last 15 years.
Now, you have to put down your television sound.
Yesterday on your program that there was no, he wasn't aware of any contractors working in the Salmo area. Well, most of the contractors from here had left there. In fact, I was asked to go over there, and then a couple of days later they changed their mind. They said they didn't want me over there.
That was where you were logging stuff at Salmo and bringing it back up for trading logs from the TFL 23, is that right?
That's right. They're buying private wood there, and also they're the former manager of Webster.
Well, we'll go into that in another time because I just can't really quite get what you're saying. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack.
Yeah.
My name is Matthew Stewart. I'm with the Vancouver Native Housing Society. This is kind of on the other end of the line, I guess, from what they're trying to do. We're trying to set up some housing societies down in Vancouver.
Just a minute. I'll have to take your number and talk to you off the air. I can't possibly handle that as I've only got a minute to go on my chosen topic. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Jack.
Yes. Yes?
Yeah, I don't know how to start. It's about the rentalsmen, you know, when the cut.
Hold on, please. I'm only going to talk about in the cusp if it's the last thing I do. What do you want to talk about? Just a moment. Go ahead, please. Hello. Hello. Are you there? Okay, speak up now. Go ahead, please.
I was wondering if Mr. Phil Herridge and Mr. Turner from the cusp are aware of the fact that Webster Timber right now is hauling good saw logs from Kootenai Forest and Salmo. I mean, #1 fir saw logs, pine, spruce, cedar, hemlock saw logs, and they're taking them right now directly into the pulp mill and chipping them up as pulp.
Give me that again. I can see what's wrong with taking saw logs and chipping them up as pulp, but from where to where?
Okay, Webster Timber right now is taking saw logs out of the lake from their closure in the Kootenai Forest area, which is Nelson, and they're also taking logs from the Salmo area, and they're beautiful saw logs, and I'm not just talking about hemlock saw logs. I'm talking about cedar, pine, spruce, fir, and the whole bit, and they are taking them right now directly into the pulp mill and chipping them up as pulp.
Now, they've surrendered the management area at Kootenai and Nelson, have they not?
Yes, they have, but the saw logs that they're taking out of that area, Mr. Webster, are coming out of the lake as the wood they've previously cut. And these are beautiful saw logs that were supposed to be cut at that mill. There are saw logs that are coming out of that Salmo area, and I'm not talking pulp, I'm talking about #1 grade saw logs. And these right now, and for the past 3 months, have been going directly to that pulp mill and being chipped up as pulp.
You mean white pine as well?
Pine, cedar, spruce, fir, the whole shot.
Will you leave your number with Steve Wyatt, please? Don't go away, hold on, because we're going to have to get back into this in some considerable detail early in the year. I'll be back after the break. Let's say Merry Christmas. I want you to shout. Very special final live program of the year tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely. And in the meantime, from St. Francis de Sales, what have you got to say?
Merry Christmas!
And a Happy New Year. Come on.
Happy New Year!
Bye.